What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 44 of the Block Exploring podcast with me as Tommy, as always. And in this episode, we're going to get into everything that happened, especially on crypto Twitter this week, where Jack Dorsey started beef with about 99% of every active account on crypto Twitter. As always, this is not financial advice, but before we get into the Jack news, we will do a quick deep dive into the state of the market to get you a sense of what the market is right now. Now, we have been experiencing a bounce back. This, I would say, is attributable to mainly Bitcoin not falling to lower levels. After experiencing the death cross, it actually went up. This is to say that we've seen a few death crosses in the past on this show as well. And what I tend to say is it's a lot of technical analysis, but you shouldn't put too much trust in it. You shouldn't see it as a prophecy that will happen. You should just see it as indicators of potential. And we see that now with everything, mainly everything, being up at least 5% or more, and projects like AVAX, Luna, blasting up to 60% over the past 7 days, or 33% over the past 7 days, and a lot of other top 20 cryptocurrencies being up quite a bit. So that's the state of the market. Now let's get into the juicy news. Jack Dorsey, former CEO of Twitter, started beef. He stated, "You don't own Web3. The venture capitalists and their liquidity pools do. It will never escape their incentives. It's ultimately a centralized entity with a different label." And Elon Musk kind of joined in on this beatdown of Web3 by saying, "Has anyone seen Web3? I can't find it." Basically, I think he has a point that we tend to think about decentralization as power to the people, power to everyone, whereas it's more refusing a dependence on a centralized authority of any sort without saying, oh, equity for everyone. So I think that's a misunderstanding a lot of people tend to go into with crypto. And also when they use services like some DeFi protocols, that they don't have a say on the functioning of these protocols. They don't have a say on how these liquidity pools are operating and what the incentives are, which, following the hypothesis set forward by Jack Dorsey, I would say is correct. If you work with, or if you decide to stake your token in some protocol or whatever, you don't really influence the rates you get on it. The incentives they give you, that's up to the liquidity pools and the venture capitalists backing the protocols. But at the same time, I think we can solve that, or at least we can work and hope to solving that by using the DAO principle, the decentralized autonomous organization, to own these kinds of liquidity pools, these protocols, and then have a joint say. And I think that that is what crypto and decentralization can also facilitate beyond what we have seen so far. But I think it is a good current wrap up of Web3 in the end of 2021, where this isn't happening as much. You have the Curve DAO, Curve Finance. That's, I think, the prime example of the DAO principle in practice and how this can be used to incentivize and collectively decide on these incentives.
I think ENS is also a good example of a DAO owning a public good. I think when we think of this issue, I have a few thoughts about these big CEOs having their say about Web3. But I think really we should be thinking about what does decentralization really mean to each person, and the reality of it is that it means different things. I mean, you've alluded to how some people might misunderstand decentralization to be equal distribution in
Yeah.
the of ownership of something, which, in my opinion, isn't what crypto is about. It wasn't what it was set out to achieve. I don't think these projects necessarily are created with the mindset that that everyone who wants to own should have an equal stake in ownership, as opposed to access to participation, which I think is the biggest part of Web3 and this move from traditional finance, traditional everything that we've had so far is that traditionally the average person is excluded from participating in financial markets. They're not a what's it called? What's that special investor called? You know what I'm talking about? A
Um,
certified investor, is that what it is? Or it's like you there's like a special tier that you reach once you're like a couple million, and then the state's like, oh yeah, you're this kind of you can make sound decisions. Forget what the word is it
yeah, I
certified?
forget the word too. I
But
think I think there's something like that. Yeah.
exactly. And those are the people who are managing finance around the world. They're able to reap the juicy gains. And I think what crypto blockchain has enabled is equal participation, that anyone can participate and anyone can be a whale if they want to. They don't If they don't want to be a whale, whatever. I mean, sometimes you can't even decide if you're a whale or not, which is it's sad. But like, yeah, equal participation. So like, whether VCs also get in on it, I think it's just natural that they would. Like, why would they not? Why would they not, right? And I think it's not necessarily even a bad thing that VCs might come in and own these decentralized protocols, because at the end of the day, they have to play by the rules of the DAO or the protocol. So if they have a stake in it, they might have a big stake, but that doesn't. We can't discount the fact that there are loads of people who are individuals who are Web3 native, and they've been delegated a lot of responsibility from token stakeholders in many of these DAOs, and they act very much like representatives and are, I guess, whales in some sense for the people, because like people's tokens have been delegated for these people to carry out the governance, right? I think we're just in such an early stage in Web3, where yes, I think it's important that we that these individuals scrutinize what is Web3. Oh, what can it be? And like, have asked these questions about decentralization. But I think like it will just evolve. It's going to evolve naturally. And I think what we're going to see is like what we've spoken about before, Elias. It's just levels of engagement. There's just going to be all kinds of there's going to be scenarios where some projects or DAOs are just 100% owned by retail, and they do their thing. There's going to be situations where it's mainly VC backed, and then there's going to be a hot mix in the middle. And I think all of that will just exist very much like all these chains we have now will probably exist and do their thing in future, while we all bicker about it now. But and ultimately it'll all exist. But I think there's we might need to, I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that some of these big CEOs are fudding on purpose so they can make room for themselves before coming in. It's a thing we've seen in crypto for a while. JP Morgan fudded the crap out of Bitcoin. Bitcoin died 10 times in the eyes of institutions before they all, a lot of them started jumping in this year. So I think this we might be seeing that happening here. you know these are Web2 based CEOs um, originally, so I wouldn't be surprised if they want to give themselves space to catch up, especially Elon Musk, who's been known to just jump into things.
Well, I was reading through all these tweets and what people had to say about it. I think a lot of it at the same time is just words at this point in time. Like, a lot of people are saying, wow, this is all possible. Imagine this, imagine that, imagine that. But at the current state of the crypto market, crypto space, I feel like it is that there's a lot of VC backed infrastructure and a lot of, for instance, voting mechanisms right now that you see is just a matter of who has the most tokens to vote, and not per se, everyone has an equal vote, which is okay. It really depends on how your voting mechanism works. But I think it's at the same time, looking at these tweets and what you're saying, flooding the market, indeed. Um, I think a lot of these guys who became Bitcoin advocates or crypto advocates in 2021 and 2020, um, they kind of need a big dip to buy a lot of stuff and
I would
to
say
have
Jack isn't part
sustainable.
of that group, but like
No,
many, there's so many, and you're right. Yeah.
yeah, and but I think at the same time, kind of preemptively crushing a lot of people's hopes for Web3 is not the best move. And at the same time, I think that there's also an important statement, like an important lesson to be drawn from this is a lot of people tend to only focus on decentralization in one way, and that's the validation mechanism that a blockchain uses. So every node is not on the same server, blah blah blah. You know the whole shebang. But there are other forms of centralization. We spoke about this in early episodes that I personally don't like Bitcoin maximalism because it is another form of centralization because you focus only on one token. And I think that we just need to figure out what aspects of decentralization do we care about, and then focus on how do we invest and how do we build in Web3. And he's right. I'd say the venture capitalists own large parts of crypto protocols. I think most prominent one is Solana, where
Yeah,
I think venture capital owns about
the
fifty
whole
percent of the
thing.
protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit wild, and you don't want to get back into that where you're
Hmm.
basically just having external validators that run a decentralized node
Hmm.
system, but one person owns it, or
Right.
all that.
Yeah.
That's like the same thing as Meta, where Facebook owns Meta,
Mhm.
but then it's decentralized
Yeah.
in the sense of people are paid to decentrally
Hmm.
manage the network.
Yeah. I think it's like it's just a tough take in my opinion, because I mean the proliferation of DAOs and the infrastructure for these things, tooling for you know for us to what we imagine decentralization in Web3 might be, or like the omitting of VCs, all this was really like happening this year. Like there's really not been a lot of time for communities to develop, for products to. I mean, I think it's amazing that we have so many dApps and so many things are being built and stuff right now, and obviously not all of them are going to get the traction that they need, that catches the eyes of whoever, because it's only been around for a hot minute. It hasn't had the time to evolve and develop. I mean, Web 2 also had to evolve and develop, right? And I think very much would be this. I think these exercises in decentralization of Web 3 will just evolve and like continue to get better, and we ultimately we'll only see these utopian um, manifestations of decentralized ownership through DAOs and all that later down the line. Like we have some good examples now, but a lot of projects need to evolve to that point. And why we see a lot of VC backed projects right now is because there is a place for VC backed projects. There's a place for VC funding, because some projects, they're just not going to catch fire with the community. To be like, there's some projects where the community just has to see it, experience it, and then they get it, right? But how are you going to get but how are you going to get to that point, if you don't have the capital to really to just rocket yourself up? And I think right now what we're seeing is that a lot of projects are trying to get to market faster, and because that matters. That matters in this space. And I think fundraising in Web3, while it's more democratized and more decentralized, I think right now it's not as easy. It's not as easy as people might make it out to be, but I think it will get easier. And ultimately, I think crowdfunded, like publicly crowdfunded projects are going to be more of the norm than VC backed. But we're going to have
Yeah,
all of it. So yeah,
true. And another part of it is, of course, that the network at least is owned by the community,
yeah,
whereas
I
now
think
the
that
network
the
isn't
security
owned.
layer, most importantly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the security lane, and I think Willy Woo, Willy Woo
yeah.
is like on-chain analyst, a big guy in
Mhm.
crypto. He tweeted at Jack. He said something in the lines of, if I remember correctly, well, the importance here lays with the open protocol. So if incentives for instance, liquidity providers or validators or miners get too perverse, the community tends to have this reaction to it. The user base tends to have this reaction to it, where they rip away the network from the founders, etc. Because a lot of this stuff is open source. They can just host it themselves, and then say, "Oh no, this is mine now." There was, I think, Monero. Something similar happened with Monero, where the rewards for validating the network were really wild, and it cost a lot of money to do anything on Monero. The users just said, "Okay, give me Monero." They rebranded. I think it used to be called CryptoNote.
Okay.
Now it's called Monero.
Right.
The community said, "This is ours now." Better incentives,
Yeah.
more equitable incentives, and that's the
That's
power. I
dope.
think the power lays in owning the network, and
Mhm.
that is, I think, the core shift
Mhm.
that we have found here from Web 2 to Web 3, and that's, I think,
Mhm.
where the decentralization, where the power to the people aspect of this lays now.
Mhm.
Not per se in everyone having the same amount of wealth and equity in this network,
Yeah.
but the fact that the community at least can band together and rip the network away if they aren't happy with whoever is running it,
Mhm.
and the fact that
Exactly.
people can DAOify if they wish.
And you can fork. You can fork protocols
Exactly.
if you're like, oh, this is cool, but they should be doing this something different. You fork it and figure it out.
Yeah,
That's
that's
what's kind
that's
of cool.
EOS, right? EOS did that.
They did, yeah.
They forked. They were unhappy. They forked. So
They forked,
exactly,
but
and I think with that kind of nugget of knowledge, I think
mhm,
that insight that you can take from this, it's, yeah, okay, Jack has a point. Right now, VCs, LPs run Web3. I would say they have the majority of the power. They're the ones giving the incentives out. But more than ever before, the users have had the power to own the
yeah,
network and to change whenever they wish. Yeah. And I think with that being said, that kind of wraps up nicely this episode of the Block Exploring podcast. Subscribe, like, and follow us on Twitter. Next time, I believe it's Thursday today. Next time, Monday, we'll have another upload for you guys, and we'll see you. Peace.
take it easy.